Welcome back to my channel. If you are just now joining us for the very first time, please go back to part 1 so that you do not miss out on over half of the book and jump in and have no idea what's happening. So, if you are new here, we love you, but please leave. Alright, for those of you who are caught up, we're going to do a little reminder of what we read about yesterday before we get started in today's chapters. So the first thing that we read yesterday, the first chapter that we read was called "And in This Corner." Well, Amy Ann was in her favorite corner in the library like always, and Trey came up and wanted to show her the new picture that he drew for their project. Well, while they were in there, Mrs. Spencer, Trey's mom, came in, and Mrs. Jones wanted to talk to her and say thank you for raising money to bring an author to the school. And the author that Mrs. Jones chose to bring to the school was DAV PILKEY, who is an author that you guys all love, but is also an author of Captain Underpants, which is one of the books that, I guess a whole series, that Mrs. Spencer got banned from the library for whatever reason. So they kind of went back and forth, and it looks like Mrs. Jones won that fight, even though it wasn't a real fight, it was more of like a verbal fight. She won that one. And then the next chapter that we read was Helen Comes Again. And before we started that chapter, I told you guys the last time that we read a chapter that was titled Helen Comes, Amy Ann got in trouble in the office, so we were trying to figure out if something bad was going to happen again, and I would say that something bad did kind of happen. There's a fight. Well, before we get into the fight, somebody had dropped, what book was it? I think it was Wait Till Helen Comes. It was Wait Till Helen Comes. Someone had dropped that book in the middle of the cafeteria, and Principal Banana had come up to pick it up and give it back to that student. But right whenever she went to go pick it up, Amy Ann was really scared. She was going to see what it was, and she was going to start asking questions and figure out who the book was from and all of this stuff, especially because it was a banned one. But as soon as that happened, as soon as she went to go pick it up, a fight started. As soon as that fight happened, after all of that, they had realized who had started it. It was Jeffrey Gonzalez. And that's who we're going to read about a little bit today. So, let's go ahead and get started on this. It's in a name. I couldn't thank Jeffrey Gonzalez the next day because he got suspended for fighting. Jeffrey was the first kid anyone could ever remember getting suspended for anything at Shelburne Elementary. I hated the way people were whispering about him in the halls and in the cafeteria, like they enjoyed that somebody had gotten into big trouble, like Jeffrey was some kind of awful criminal. Space Cadet was a geek, but he was a really nice guy. At least he always had been. So I've been thinking about our visibility problem, Danny said. I hadn't even seen him come sit at the desk next to me and Rebecca. Our visibility problem? Rebecca said. As in, our books being visible when somebody drops one in the cafeteria, I interpreted. Exacto mundo. Danny flicked his hair back, and I've got an idea, but it may require adding a new board member. Who? I asked. Let's get passes to the computer lab and I'll introduce you, Danny said. The computer lab had enough computers and printers for an entire class to use, but it was usually open for kids with passes unless a teacher had reserved it. Mr. Deacon checked our passes and Danny led us to the back corner where another kid was sitting. I'd never seen him before, which made me think he wasn't a 4th grader, but he looked like a 4th grader, maybe even a 3rd grader. He was short and stick-thin, with skin as dark black as mine and thick curly hair cut short on the sides, but very tall in the middle like a mushroom. He peered up at us through round gold-rimmed glasses. Danny did some secret handshake with him. Ladies, may I introduce MJ, aka Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan? I asked. You mean like the basketball player? MJ slumped. Yes. He hates his name because he can't play basketball, Danny said. At all, MJ said. Danny took a seat beside him, and he's the shortest kid in 5th grade. 5th grade? And I thought he might be a 3rd grader. 2nd shortest, MJ said. People in wheelchairs don't count in height competitions, Danny told him. MJ looked lasers at him. Man, do you want my help or not? Yes, yes, Danny said. He flicked his hair back and motioned for us to sit. What I didn't tell you about MJ is that he's like the best computer artist in the whole school. MJ looked more pleased to hear that. Show him what you got, MJ, Danny said. MJ called up a file on the computer. It was a cover of The Lightning Thief I'd never seen before, with Percy facing off against the massive Minotaur he fights the first time he goes to Camp Half-Blood. It was a great cover. What is this? I asked. A foreign edition? No, man. This is the MJ edition. You drew this? Rebecca said. On the computer. But yeah, MJ said. Didn't I tell you he was the best? Danny said. How does this help? Rebecca asked. We get MJ to make up fake covers and we put them on the books, I said. Danny flicked his hair out of his eyes. Got it in one. See, now anybody drops a book in the cafeteria, Principal Banana picks it up. She sees some other book. You'll do it? I asked. You'll make us up fake covers for all of our books? Yeah, MJ said. But it won't work the same. It won't work to have the same cover for all of them. How many books are we talking about? 27, I told him. And more coming, Rebecca said. We hope. MJ whistled. I better get started, but I'm going to need some titles. Real ones? Danny asked. We better not, I said. If I realized this wasn't a real cover for The Lightning Thief, a teacher might too. We need some fake titles. MJ opened a word processing document. I'm all ears. Right now, Rebecca said. You want covers? I need titles, MJ said. How do you come up with a book title? How do authors come up with book titles? I never even thought about it. Book titles always had something to do with what was inside. So how could we come up with book titles for books that weren't real? Danny combed his hair away from his eyes with his fingers again, and I smiled. The boy who fell in love with his hair, I said. MJ cackled and started typing. Hey, that's not funny, Danny said. He flicked his hair, then realized what he was doing and blushed. Here's one for you. Hair sucker. I shrank. I didn't know anybody ever noticed me chewing on my braids. Naturally curly, Rebecca said, pretending to primp her black curly hair. MJ laughed. All right, they can't all be about hair. We can't say sucker either, or they'll ban that too, Rebecca said. The girl who only loved books, Danny said. MJ nodded. I like that. Keep 'em coming. Jessica Rogers, girl lawyer, Rebecca said. I shook my head. Too close to something else. Rebecca brightened. Really? What? I shook my head again to let her know she really didn't want to read it. The Mystery of the Blue Parrot, I said. The 17th Princess, Rebecca said. Wet dog smell. Mr. Bear opens a bank account. I think I can see my house from here. They were already dead. Smell my finger. Tales of a 4th grade zombie. Robot super ninja. No. Super robot ninja. No. Super ninja robot man. Danny, it doesn't matter. It's not a real book. I want it to sound good. We went back and forth, laughing as we came up with titles, with MJ typing all the time. We were having so much fun, Mr. Deacon had to tell us to hold it down. I popped up from behind the computer to signal him that we would be quiet, and saw someone in the next row of computers staring right back at me. Trey McBride. He waved at me with one hand. His other hand was on the lid of a scanner. The light inside glided back and forth, and he opened it, took his sketchbook out, and flipped it over to scan the other side. I dropped back behind the row of computers, where the other 3 were swallowing their laughter so hard they were crying. Guys, I whispered, we have to hold it down. Rebecca nodded, tears rolling down her face. Danny let out something like a honk. I'm serious, I hissed. Trey's in the next row over. He probably heard everything we said. That got Rebecca and Danny's attention. They stopped laughing and peeked over the top of the row. Who's Trey? MJ asked. The son of the lady who banned all these books, I told him. But was that all he was, her son? Or was he her spy too? All right, I still need more titles, MJ said. I've got one, I said. How about friend or foe? La. I bounced over to the door where Rebecca and Danny were already in line. Today was the day of Dave Pilkey's author visit. I didn't really like his books, but I'd never met a real-life author before. I also had a book of his that I'd just bought for the BBLL tucked away under my shirt. I wanted to get it autographed. Mr. Vaughn led us to the cafeteria, where we sat in a big half-circle with the rest of 4th grade. Mrs. Jones stood in the middle of the circle at the projector cart, with a man I guessed was Mr. Pilkey. He was white, medium-sized, and not too old, with short brown hair and a flowery Hawaiian shirt. He smiled at something Mrs. Jones said to him, and then she called for our attention. All right, 4th graders, I'm very pleased to introduce an author whose books many of you have read and enjoyed. I know I have. DAV PILKEY. Mrs. Jones said his name like Dave, even though it was spelled D-A-V. Is the author of more than 50 books, most of which he also illustrated, including The Dumb Bunnies, Ricky Ricotta, and of course, Captain Underpants. He's also the winner of a Caldecott honor for The Paperboy, and a number of Reader's Choice Awards around the country. That last part, Mrs. Jones said after Principal Banana came in the room to stand by the door, I noticed. I'm sure Mr. Pilkey will tell you lots more about his life and his books, so I'll turn things over to him. Let's give a big Shelbourne Elementary welcome to Mr. DAV PILKEY, she said. Everybody cheered, mostly just for the sake of being able to clap and yell at school. But I cheered because I was really happy he was here. Mr. Pilkey showed slides of things he had drawn when he was a kid, and told us how he was always getting in trouble at school and getting sent out into the hall to sit by himself. I glanced over at Principal Banana when he said that, and she didn't look too happy. The kids around me were all loving it, though. Mr. Pilkey was funny, and everybody was laughing. Then Mr. Pilkey talked about when he drew his first comics, and how they weren't spelled right, and didn't look as good as he can draw now, and how none of that mattered because they were a lot of fun and made his friends laugh. You don't have to spell well or be great at grammar to be a writer, he told us, and you don't have to be able to draw perfectly to be an artist. Then he gave examples of famous artists who broke the rules and painted houses upside down, and famous writers who didn't use the right spelling or grammar. Some of the teachers didn't like that so much either. It wasn't until Mr. Pilkey was in college that a teacher saw his drawings and told him he should be writing and drawing books for kids. That was how he became a kid's book author. He finished his talk, showed us how to draw a picture of Captain Underpants, and asked us if we had any questions. I put my hand up, but so did a lot of other kids. The questions they asked were dumb. Did you write all those books? How much money do you make? Where do you get your ideas? I like to draw comics too, which wasn't even a question. Do you know any famous authors? Can you draw Batman? And then he called on me. My heart was racing as I asked, what do you think about your books being banned from our library? The room got very quiet, and I tried very hard not to look at Principal Banana. Mr. Pilkey smiled. Well, I wish they were on the shelves, where everyone could read them, he said. I think it's important that libraries be a place where you can find all kinds of books. Good ones, bad ones, funny ones, serious ones. Every person should be free to read whatever they want, whenever they want, and not have to explain to anyone else why we like it, or why we think it's valuable. I hope you all get a chance to read my book someday. I smiled, my heart still thumping so loud in my chest I thought everyone could hear it. The one copy of Captain Underpants I'd bought before the author visit was going to be checked out forever. I looked over at Principal Banana again. She had her arms folded and was glaring, but not at Mr. Pilkey and not at me. She was glaring at Mrs. Jones. People asked more questions, mostly dumb ones, and then Mrs. Jones said we were out of time. Everybody cheered again to thank Mr. Pilkey for being here, and the teachers started dismissing us by class. Mr. Vaughn, can I go and meet the author? I begged. He nodded. Come right back to class afterward, he told me. I grabbed Rebecca and Danny without asking if they could come too, and hurried across the room to where Mrs. Jones stood with Mr. Pilkey. Mrs. Jones hugged me while we waited for a couple of kids from another class to be done showing their comics to Mr. Pilkey. My little rebel, Mrs. Jones said to me. Rebel? Me? The two boys who had drawn the comics were finally called away by their teacher, and we got to say hello. That's when I realized I couldn't say anything to him about the BBLL, not with Mrs. Jones standing there, and that's all I'd come to talk about. Rebecca, Danny, and I just stood there smiling up at him for a long time. He smiled back like he was waiting for us to say something, but after a while his smile began to falter. So, do any of you guys like to draw? Mr. Pilkey asked us. We all shook our heads. Oh, do you like to write? We all shook our heads. Mr. Pilkey laughed. Well, you like to read at least, I hope. Oh yeah, Rebecca said. You have no idea. A student tripped over the cord to the projector cart, and Mrs. Jones hurried away to take care of it. Finally, I looked around once to make sure no one else was watching and pulled the Captain Underpants book out from under my shirt. Will you sign this? I asked Mr. Pilkey. He looked surprised and took the book from me. He looked even more surprised when he saw the cover. Smell my finger, he said. The cover had a picture of a kid with a stinky finger, and another kid passed out on the ground beside him. That's just what's on the outside, I told Mr. Pilkey, and I opened to the book to show him what was inside. The Adventures of Captain Underpants. Oh, he said. He flipped through it and found the envelope I'd pasted in the back with the checkout card in it. Oh, he said. He looked again at the fake cover. Who did the art? Our friend MJ. He's in 5th grade, Danny said. Tell him I said it's great. I should write a real book called Smell My Finger. He looked around to see if anybody was looking. So I'm guessing your teachers don't know you have this? We shook our heads. I see. He took a Sharpie from his pocket and opened the book to a front page. Anybody in particular I should make it out to? The BBLL, Danny said. BBLL? He asked. He wrote it in the book. To the BBLL. And drew a quick sketch of Captain Underpants saying, Cha-la-la, under his signature. Do I want to know what BBLL stands for? He asked as he handed it back. I stuffed the book up under my shirt. Probably not, I said. All right, we'll keep reading, you guys, and don't get into too much trouble. Mrs. Jones came back. Mr. Pilkey, when you're done with these 3, I have one more student for you to meet. I almost squeaked. Mrs. Jones had brought Trey McBride to see the author. Why? I sucked in my stomach, praying he couldn't see the book under my shirt. We have to get back to class, I said. I grabbed Rebecca and Danny and ran off so fast, Mr. Pilkey barely had time to call out, bye, to us.
Hey guys, thanks for checking in and watching and listening to the book as we go on. Make sure that you're washing your hands and staying safe and staying clean during this time, and we'll see you when we see you. Bye.